Minogue.
A quite short call on this part 2, the validation and consequential amendments, which is seeking to fix up mistakes in the original legislation as I understand it. But because this is being rushed through under urgency, we don't actually have the opportunity to hear from submitters about whether the mistakes that we are correcting were caused by a lack of clarity in the legislation, or whether the situation was more complex, leading to this misinterpretation, as it might be. So the Minister has just stood up to clarify that the first point around the closure of submission dates was clarifying that there had been 2 dates, as I understand it, the 14th of February and then the 28th of February, and that this is to clarify and provide that clarity that those submissions that were received between the 14th and the 28th are indeed valid. So was that problem in the lack of clarity in the legislation, or was that in the communication material that was sent out to people around closure dates? I'm sorry if it's being obtuse, but I'm struggling to get the detail of that. And that is because we haven't had that select committee process. And when I've been thinking about this issue and why select committee is so valuable, been realising that actually when we get the submissions around the details, it helps us understand and fulfil our role as opposition and scrutinising legislation as well as the functioning of government. And part of that, we get to find out how legislation is operating at the community level through the submissions. And those submissions are often reported in the media that enable people in the community to then reflect on the impact of the legislation and the consideration of the implementation of that. Now, clearly that's not happening in this process. And I really think that particularly when it comes to fixing up mistakes and validations of consequential amendments, that is a significant point that we need to consider. It's about our assuring that we have a good lawmaking process and that people are able to consider what went wrong and properly interrogate that, and that is missing from this process. So there's the point about the closure of the submission dates, and there is the point about new section 171, which validates any hearing session of the hearings panel that was held concurrently with another session. And we've heard previously in this debate that this has been happening for a while, and that this is validating that. But again, we haven't heard how long has this been happening. Was this happening because the commissioners interpreted the legislation to think that that was appropriate? Or was that happening just because they weren't looking at the legislation and that they were getting on with business and trying to expedite the process? So they actually create 2 very different situations. And we haven't had the information to tell us what the problem was to find out whether this is the appropriate legislative response to the problem. And that is not good lawmaking. And our responsibility in this House is to have appropriate oversight and to do our best to make sure that the laws on the books serve the purpose that we want. There are, of course, more broadly than this, principles of good lawmaking or a good delivery of principle and democracy, and whether the concurrent hearings is actually something that we want to be supporting. It seems from what we've picked up in the media and what people have said that maybe it is, but there's been no opportunity for somebody who may have had involvement in this process, who may have had concerns, to be able to come to this House and express those concerns. And I think that really is doing a discredit to the communities of Auckland to lock them out of this process, when I really do believe the first principle of decision-making in this place should be fostering democracy.
Call Ron Mark.